Hello, y'all. My name is Avero Sanchez, and today I'm going to be talking about my final paper. And in my final paper, the topics I'm going to be covering is going to be absurdity, playfulness, and impermanence. And in the context of Albert Camus, Zhuangzi, and Dogen, Zhuangzi and Dogen being the two that we have covered in class, and then Camus being a secondary source that I'll bring outside to compare and contrast with these two. So in terms of the in terms of how the presentation is going to go, I'm first just going to introduce the question that I'm going to explore in my essay. Then I'm going to give my thesis statement on said question. And then afterwards, I'm going to give some brief background into what I believe each philosopher would say on the topic. And then from there, I'm going to discuss any problems or objections that I could come up with, as well as my rebuttal to said objections. And then finally, I'm just going to leave y'all with my conclusion as well as the sources that I will be using for my paper. So in terms of the question that I am exploring in my paper, that is going to be, how does one confront a world without fixed meaning? So next, I'm going to go on to my thesis, that being, Camus, Zhuangzi, and Dogen each accept that the world lacks fixed meaning, but they offer three different responses: defiant affirmation, playful wandering, and practice realization. Together, they show that the absence of fixed meaning is not a loss, but an invitation to live more freely. And for some background on what I believe each philosopher would say, when it comes to Camus, so Camus' big thing being absurdity, that being the conflict between the human's need for meaning as well as the world inherently having no meaning. So basically that humans' desire for leading leads to conflict, and that conflict is absurdity. And then, once again, that life has no ultimate purpose. And then Camus is going to say that the correct response is going to be defiant affirmation, which was mentioned in the previous slide, but that being the proper response being to revolt, to rebel, to defy, as well as to chase freedom and passion. And then this might give away what source I'm going to be using, but I added a quote from that being, we must imagine Sisyphus being happy, that being in reference to him pushing the rock up the mountain. Which was Albert Camus' The Myth of Sisyphus being one of his most famous works. In terms of Zhuangzi, so he's going to be transformation and playfulness. That's kind of going to be his take on it, or what I take to be his take. So some of the main idea of Zhuangzi, which I feel fit into this, is his idea there is no such thing as a fixed identity, and that the world is constantly transforming. Think Dream of the Butterfly. And that there are no fixed distinctions. Like, all distinctions are human constructions, that being things such as right or wrong, or someone having a self or another form of a self. And that the ideal response in order to kind of cope with this no fixed meaning is going to be through kind of wandering. We can see that in his exercises, in his language, never having any fixed meanings, as well as being spontaneous, as well as just being openly playful. I think this is seen a lot in his writing. I mean, bringing it back, like the perspective shifts, kind of, once again, the butterfly dream. And then I wanted to add a quote from Zhuangzi, one of the ones I found the most interesting in the reading, that being, where can I find a man who has forgotten words so I may have a word with him? And then in terms of Dogen, he's going to be about impermanence and practice realization. So, like, all other Buddhists, specifically, and especially Zen Buddhists, the idea that there is no fixed self, there is no self. That being seen in his work, to study the self is to forget the self. Kind of the idea that in order to kind of see this alignment, a lot of it is through practice realization. So kind of recognizing that each a meaning of something emerges from moment to moment. And kind of this whole idea that you don't necessarily have to do something in order to become something. I remember the quote that you don't meditate to become a Buddha. Buddhas just inherently meditate. And then I also found another one of his quotes really fascinating, that being that practice and realization are one, tying back into the idea that practice is in its own a very form of enlightenment, and that kind of that meaningless kind of disappears when you stop seeking meaning from things outside of lived practice. Kind of this whole idea being, what is it, that everything is a bowl of rice, that the beauty in things aren't necessarily these big giant things, but rather often is seen in the very simple things we do day to day. And then in terms of some of the problems and or objections I can find myself running into, the massive one I can think about that, if there is no fixed meaning, how does this not collapse into nihilism? But at least from my perspective, I don't feel that these philosophers are trying to say be nihilistic, but rather they're trying to say that while yes, life doesn't have an inherent fixed meaning, that doesn't mean that you can't live an enjoyable life and give life meaning in its own regards. For example, I feel like for Camus, in terms of the ethical framework he lives out, is that it kind of all depends on individuals. So once again, that you as an individual give yourself meaning in life, as opposed to the world imposing a single fixed reason for your being. In the case of Zhuangzi, I feel that for him, that I know he talks a lot about it in his wife's death, that letting go of a fixed meaning kind of leads to compassion. I kind of see that with the quote I mentioned earlier with the can I find a man who knows no words so that I can have a conversation with him? And then in the case of Dogen, I feel that that is the reason why he preaches so much for practice, that because we are given no inherent meaning, it is only through the practice such as meditation, things like drop body, drop mind, for the cut, y'all. It turns out that my camera actually, the audio cut out right at the conclusion, but it's fine. I'll just redo it. So for the conclusion I think what makes all of these philosophers' takes so fascinating is they all kind of accept the same thing, that being that the world doesn't inherently impose a meaning on anyone, and that, the world lacks a fixed meaning. But they all kind of take those very differently. They all have their own kind of approaches on it. I think the best way I could do this is just to one word summarize. I feel like for Camus, the main thing being rebel, and that through that rebellion is where you find your own meaning. For Zhuangzi, that being kind of flow, go with the flow, constantly transform, never have a fixed transformation, and always kind of be open to things, just and through that openness that you'll probably find something that will give your life purpose or reason. And for Dogen, that just being the practice that just because life doesn't inherently have a meaning, that doesn't mean to just give up, but through stuff like practice, meditation, drop body, drop mind, things like that, you can actually find a deeper understanding. There's something beneath the surface. There's a deeper level of understanding to be had there. And then, of course, I think what makes all of these so fascinating is just the non-dualistic aspect of it. I think non-dualists have always been my favorite kind of philosophers. And a lot of this topic it's not very conflict-driven. I don't think any of them inherently kind of contradict each other. I think they're all just a specific individual's take on an issue, which I think is pretty nice and fascinating. And then with that, I know some of my sources already got spoiled earlier, but the sources I'll be using are going to be Albert Camus' The Myth of Sisyphus. And then for both of the philosophers we covered in class, I'm going to just keep the same text that we use in class, that being Mu and a Dewdrop by Dogen, and then the same version, The Complete Writings of Zhuangzi, that we read in class. So yeah, that's my presentation. Thanks for listening.